I hope this is good and everybody can hear and see. So welcome once more to the last of the Anshi Chesed Sisterhood Zoom programs. Continuing with our theme of Jewish American Heritage Month, proclaimed by President Trump, and Jewish immigrants who have contributed so much to America, today we're going to look at people from 6 different countries who have made enormous contributions to the modern world, the world of science and medicine and technology. Early Jewish immigrants were virtually responsible for every aspect of the world of entertainment and the arts, and they made great contributions to the worlds of fashion and commerce. And now, in recent years, Jewish immigrants have won Nobel Prizes in science and medicine and have come to dominate the world of technology. I am sure that though many of you benefit from these great innovations, the names of these creators that I'm going to talk about today are much less familiar to you. So here they are. I'm going to hold them up and I hope you can see them all. Is this visible to everybody? I hope so. The first one is Salome Gluckson Walsh, and then Eric Kandel, and then Baruch Ben Asarif, Rita Levi Montalcini, Sergey Brin, and the last, the most incredible of all, Jan Koum. So we have no idea of knowing how many people would have contributed so much to the world from the Holocaust. But I am going to start with some people who were
Leah, we can't hear you.
She muted herself.
Oh, Mazel tov.
Muted.
Leah, you were unmuted for a while, so please start from when you started with after introducing the people. Leah?
all their wealth disappeared in the inflation following World War I. And as a young girl, she had to endure tremendous anti-Semitic taunts from her schoolmates. And I quote, "I had to fight on the street against the children who ran after me and sang dirty anti-Semitic songs. I grew up fighting and I fought to the end." She originally intended to study the classics, but she wanted to go to Palestine. And as a Zionist, she switched to biology, a discipline that she thought would be more practical in Palestine. She received her PhD in 1932 from the laboratory of Hans Spemann, a famous embryologist who went on 3 years later to win the Nobel Prize. She was very well trained, and yet there was no place in Germany for a person of her gender and her religion. "You, a woman and a Jew, forget it," said one potential employer after another. She was able to obtain employment as a research assistant at the University of Berlin. And there she met an eminent young biochemist, Rudolf Schoenheimer, and they got married. In 1933, the couple fled Hitler's Germany to move to Columbia University, where he, Rudolf Schoenheimer, found a position. Columbia's policies at the time were not to allow women to be faculty members. So she worked as an assistant, laboratory assistant to a Professor Samuel Detweiler, who was a developmental neurobiologist. Then she worked with a geneticist, Leslie Dunn, on a project that would combine her new knowledge of genetics and embryology. In 1938, She published her first scientific paper, and she still could not get an appointment to Columbia University. She remained Dunn's research assistant for 17 years and spent several years working with a friend, Sarah Ratner, who was chairman of the Department of OB-GYN, a different division of Columbia. Now, 1955, Ernest and Berta Scherer were recruiting people for a newly formed medical school, the Albert Einstein College of Medicine. And at last she found a place where competent Jewish women were welcome. By 1958, she had become a full professor. And in 1963, she became chairman of the Department of Genetics at Albert Einstein Medical School. Though she officially retired in 1978, she continued working in her laboratory. Above her desk, she had two pictures, one of Albert Einstein and one of Lillian Hellman. In 1979, Salome Gluckson-Walsh was elected to the National Academy of Sciences and made an honorary life member of the New York Academy of Science. In 1982, and this is interesting, she got a gold diploma from her alma mater, the University of Freiburg in Germany. Memories of the Holocaust led her to decline this gold diploma. She went on to other great things in science. Now her private life. Schoenheimer, her husband, died in 1941, a suicide. So she married his second fellow. His name was Heinrich Wells. She was a biochemist in 1943. They had two children, Naomi and Peter. He died in 1966. And Salome Gluckson-Walsh influenced two generations of developmental biologists, and she became a model for Jews and non-Jews, men and women who wish to combine both science with the freedom of spirit and humor and family after enduring an awful, awful lot. So a tremendous story of a person from Germany. Now, the next person is a fellow named Eric Kandel. And if you watch PBS, you can frequently see him. He's still alive. He was born in 1929, but he's frequently a guest on PBS. He is an American neuropsychiatrist, and he won the Nobel Prize in the year 2000 for medicine for his research on the physiological basis of memory storage in the neurons in our brain. He shared it, by the way, with two other people, Arvid Carlson and Paul Greengard. He is still alive. He is a professor of biochemistry and biophysics at Columbia, and he's a senior investigator at the Howard Hughes Medical Institute, and he's written tremendously, and he is very, very, very well known in the field. Now, some interesting things about his bio. He was born in 1928 in Vienna to a middle-class Ashkenazi Jewish family. His mother was born in the Ukraine, and at that time it was part of Eastern Poland, and his father was from a very poor town in Galicia. Anyway, the parents moved to Vienna. They met and they got married in 1923. And his father opened a toy store in Vienna. They were thoroughly assimilated and an acculturated family. But then when Germany annexed Austria, they had to leave. Now, Eric and his brother left before his parents, and they went to Brooklyn, and they arrived in Brooklyn in 1939. His parents didn't arrive till many years later. But he moved in with an uncle who was religious, who started to teach him Limudei Kodesh, his Jewish studies, and the uncle enrolled him at the Yeshiva of Flatbush. So he went to the Yeshiva of Flatbush, and he graduated in 1944. By the way, there were other Nobel Prize winners who went to the university, to Flatbush Yeshiva, and then he went to Brooklyn's Erasmus Hall High School, a public high school. Again, several Nobel Prize winners went to that high school. Initially, he was interested in history, and he went to Harvard University. While he was at Harvard, the big name on the campus was somebody named B.F. Skinner. And he was becoming world famous for his views in psychology. And he had a tremendous. So he changed his major. And like I said, he graduated medical school and became very, very, very interested in the science of hearing and how the brain works and the interconnection between psychology and your health and your brain and so on. And he is also very entertaining. If you've watched him on TV, very, very, very entertaining. And as I said, he did go on to win a Nobel Prize in the year 2000. But I want to tell you another interesting part, the story of his life. So he won the Nobel Prize in 2000, and the country of Austria took it as an Austrian Nobel Prize. And he said, and I quote, typically Viennese, very opportunistic, very disingenuous, somewhat hypocritical, but it certainly was not an Austrian Nobel Prize. It was a Jewish American Nobel Prize. So, didn't take long before he got a letter from Thomas Klestel, who was the president of Austria. And he said, Professor Kandel, how can we make wrong things right? And Eric Kandel thought about it for a while. And he said, okay, for a starter, the main street in Vienna is named after Dr. Karl Lueger. He was a close friend of Hitler. You can change the name of that street. The second thing he said was he wanted Austria to invite back the entire Jewish intellectual community that they had chased out and to give scholarships to any Jewish kid from throughout the world who would want a scholarship. And again, the president acceded. He also proposed to have a symposium on Austria's response to National Socialism or Nazism. And yes, the government of Austria approved that. So he has since accepted an honorary citizenship of Vienna and participates very, very, very actively in the life of the city that chased him out and from which he had to leave. But I just thought that was very, very, very interesting. Now, the next fellow, I am sure you never heard of him. His name is Baruch Ben Asarif. But it is interesting that right now, with the coronavirus, his research that won him the Nobel Prize is exactly the research that scientists are working on today. And the question he looked at was, how come two people can be exposed to the same thing? Some persons will get the cancer, some won't. Some people will get coronavirus, other people won't. And that was the theme of his research, for which he won a Nobel Prize. He is a Venezuelan American immunologist. He shared the 1980 Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine for, and I quote, the discovery of the major histocompatibility complex genes which encode cell surface protein molecules important for the immune system's distinction between self and non-self. Translated, it means why some of us get something and other people don't. That's very, very simple language, but that's applicable to today, and he won a Nobel Prize for that in 1980. Fascinating background. He was born in Caracas, October 29th, 1920, to a Sephardic family. Both of his parents had moved to Venezuela from Morocco. They were comfortable. His father was in the textile business. And his brother, by the way, for those of you who know philosophy, and I see at least one there, his brother is the well-known philosopher Paul Ben Asarif. Now, the family moved from Venezuela to Paris for this family in 1925. Then they moved back to Venezuela because his father had big business in Venezuela. And then they came to the United States in 1940. He went to a school in New York, and my friend is very, very bad, called the Lycée Français de New York, where he earned a baccalaureate degree that entitled him, it's similar to what they do in Paris and France, I understand, but it entitled him to go to university. And he got into Columbia University, graduating in 1942. And he wanted to go to medical school. He was refused by every single medical school that he applied to. When a person wins a Nobel Prize, they have to write their autobiography for the committee who determines who is the Nobel Prize winners. And very frequently, if you look at their own autobiographies, you get some very interesting information. So this is what Baruch Ben-Asarif wrote on his autobiography for the Nobel Prize Committee. Quote, by that time, 1942, I had elected to study biology and medicine instead of going into the family business as my father would have wanted. I did not realize, however, that admission to medical school was a formidable undertaking for someone with my ethnic and foreign background in the United States. In spite of an excellent academic record at Columbia, I was refused admission by every medical school I applied to, and I found it impossible and lost my interest in going to medicine. Now, his father had a business associate, a wealthy man from Richmond, Virginia. His name was George Bakeman. He was a close friend of the head person at the Medical College of Virginia, which was in Richmond. And he found out that one person didn't report to medical school that year. So he called his friend, Mr. Ben-Asarif, and he said, quick, your son can get into the Medical College of Virginia. And that's how he got into medical school. Anyway, after medical school, he joined the United States Army. He was in the Army for 3 years. He worked at a military hospital in Nancy, France, and became a researcher at Columbia upon his return. He kept going back and forth between America and Paris. He really felt very, very comfortable in Paris. And then he came back to America and joined the faculty of Harvard Medical School, and he became a professor of comparative pathology. He worked at the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute, and he got very, very well known in the Boston area. And at that time, he began his research on immunology with several other very, very famous people in the area. And he made the discovery that if you inject certain animals, two different groups, some will respond a certain way, some will respond a different way. This research, I'm just simplifying it because honestly, I can't do much better explaining it scientifically, but this research would lead to an understanding of what we call autoimmune diseases, why some people get this and some people don't. And as I say, it won for him the Nobel Prize in that year, but not after he had to go through so much to get to medical school. So Baruch Ben-Asarif, I think that's how you pronounce it, Ben-Asaraf, made a great contribution to medicine as a person of Venezuela who went via Paris to the United States, but always as a Jewish person. All right, the next is a lady I feel like I'm connected to her because I am so fond of her. And if ever I had the opportunity to do a one-lady show, which I sometimes think about, this is the lady I would do it about because her life is so fascinating. Her name is Rita Levi Montalcini, and very, very interesting. She was born in 1909 in Turin, Italy. She was a twin, and her twin, Paola, went on to become a very famous artist. What I find so interesting is Turin, Italy is not Rome, it's not Paris, it's a small city. It never had a big Jewish population. As a matter of fact, the population there never exceeded 50,000 Jewish people. Yet, Turin, Italy produced 4 Jewish Nobel Prize winners. Fascinating. But one of them in particular explains why many of us retired in Florida. And just to digress for a minute, I have to tell you, because it's so fascinating, you'll remember his name. His name was Franco Modigliani, related to the famous artist. And in 1958, while at the University of Illinois, he had come from Italy and picked up a doctorate along the way. He was at the University of Illinois, and he came up with a theory called the life cycle theory. He was an economist, and what it was, he was telling the government of the United States that we better prepare because people are living longer. They're going to become senior citizens. They're going to have extra money, and they're going to want to have a life beyond their retirement. So therefore, America as a country and an economy should begin to think of how we're going to treat these senior citizens. For that, he won his Nobel Prize, and he too came from Turin, Italy. But now back to my heroine, Rita Levi-Montalcini. So in those days, very common in Italy, as well as other places, Jewish women weren't encouraged to go on to graduate school, and her parents said, you cannot go to medical school. However, a very close friend of the family was dying of cancer, and Rita Levi-Montalcini said, I'm going to go to medical school, and I'm going to figure out a way to conquer cancer. So anyway, she went to the medical school in Turin, Italy, in 1930, graduated in 1936, and her favorite professor was a guy named Giuseppe Levi. He, by the way, produced a couple of Nobel Prize winners. But anyway, what she said she learned from Professor Levi was 2 things, not only medicine and science, but she learned how to do research, that he was a world-class researcher. Well, now it's 1938, and Mussolini introduces the laws barring Jews from any academic or professional careers, and that really cut things short. She knew people already, and she got an invitation to go to Belgium. Shortly after she went to Belgium, the Germans took over Belgium. She went back to Italy, established a lab in a bedroom in her parents' house, and she often says the first genetic lab in the world was in my parents' bedroom in Turin, Italy. And then she continued on with her experiments. Then Italy entered the war on the side of the Germans, and the Allies began to bomb. So the family had to leave again. She left her laboratory. She went into hiding, and then ended up in Florence, Italy. And the family stayed in Florence until Italy was liberated in August of 1944. Immediately after the liberation, Rita Levi-Montalcini went to the DP camps, and she walked through them and saw all that had happened to the Jewish people. She then went back to Turin, Italy, to report all this to her professor, Giuseppe Levi. And she began to do research. Anyway, she was doing research, I'm not exactly sure on what, but anyway, the results that she was coming up with in her research were contrary to the identical research that a Professor Victor Hamburger was doing at Washington University in St. Louis. So she got a letter from Professor Hamburger, come to St. Louis for 1 semester to WashU. You're going to see whose research is really right, and we'll work together at WashU. So she did go to Washington U. The 1 semester turned out to be 30 years. She became a full professor of science at Washington University. But all through the years, she kept going back and spent half a year in Italy and half a year in St. Louis at Washington U. She was doing a lot of work with another Jewish professor named Stanley Cohn, and he was trying to identify the nerve growth factor. Anyway, the 2 of them went on together, and they were doing this research in what causes growth in the nerve and what causes growth in the epidermal, the skin area. and both of them won Nobel Prizes in 1986. Hers was for the nerve growth factor, and his was for the epidermal growth factor. The next year, she won America's highest award, the National Medal of Science. She continued to go back and forth to Italy until she was an elderly woman. And by the way, there are certain people here in our community who went to WashU who had her as a professor. Anyway, she did that and became editor of the Encyclopedia Italiana. And also she was the first woman and the first Jew into the Pontifical Academy of Sciences in Rome. She was highly acknowledged, this woman. Now, that's the first part of her life. Now, the interesting part starts. So she's now in her 90s, and she was appointed an ambassador by the United Nations for their Food and Agricultural Organization. And she went to all the underdeveloped countries of the world and reported back on how much poverty there was in these countries. In 2001, when she was 92 years old, she was appointed a senator for life into the government of Italy. Her information about people around the world and poverty and food, as well as being a Nobel Prize winner, served her in good stead. She stayed as a senator in the Italian government until she died at age 103 and a half. And Rita Levi Montalcini has the distinction of being the longest lived Nobel Prize winner ever. A very, 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 very colorful and distinguished woman who contributed so much, not just to Italy, but to the rest of the world. All right, next.
Leah, I
yes,
just want to say
yes.
we are running out. It's 6.75 minutes left. They just made it
How much?
6
Okay.
minutes. Okay.
Okay,
I'll let you
so
know.
we got two people left, and I have more, but we'll stop at those two. But these are modern day people, younger than our own children for most of us here, and the contributions that they gave to the world are immense. The first one is Sergey Brin. Sergey Brin, what did he do that we couldn't live without? I couldn't have prepared this talk without Sergey Brin. Sergey Brin is responsible for Google, and it is a wonderful story. He was born in 1973 in Moscow. His father was a math teacher in the Soviet Union during the 70s when they took away all the rights of the academics in the Soviet Union. And so the family fled to the United States. Anyway, Sergey was educated in the area around Washington, D.C., and went to high school there. His father was a teacher there, and then he went to Stanford University for his degree. And at Stanford, he wanted to develop something that would be like an initial search machine. He met another guy named Larry Page, who's from East Lansing, Michigan, whose father to this day is still a computer science professor at East Lansing, Michigan. And the two of them got together, and they were working in a garage to create this search machine. They put out a little notice that they needed money. These were two poor kids, one from Russia, one an academic son. They didn't have any money, and they had this grand idea. So they put out a little notice that they needed some money, and along came a gentleman named Andy Bechelstein. And he said he would like to invest in their business. Now, they were calling it GOOGOL. That's a mathematical term that means one with 100 zeros after it. And only people in math know the value of something like that. So Mr. Bechelstein got very, very interested, and he wrote them a check on the spot for $100,000. That was more money than they had ever seen, these two kids. But he spelled it GOOGLE. They're looking at the check. They have to decide, do we want Mr. Bechelstein's money, or do we change the name of the company that we're proposing to Google? And that's how Google got its name. It really was meant to be a mathematical term with, like I say, 100 zeros after it. Anyway, at the beginning, they were hoping they would get a few thousand searches a day. Everybody knows what happened to Google. In 2015, Google was restructured under a new parent company called Alphabet, and Brin and Page were serving as Alphabet's officers. A couple of very, very fascinating things. His father led a group of students back to Moscow when Sergei was 18, and he went with him, and he saw the conditions that his father had to live in, and they went even to the sanitarium where his father was put, and in front of all the kids, Sergei broke down, and he started to cry, and he said, "Thank you, Father, for taking us out of Russia." So that's one story. Another story is he was invited to be the guest at Shimon Peres's 80th birthday party in Israel, because he was already well known in the field of technology. And Peres asked him to say a few words about Israel. And this is what he said off the spot. Looks to me like the next Silicon Valley will be here. It has the potential to be even more successful than Silicon Valley because people here are hungrier. And that was his birthday comments to Shimon Peres. But lastly, when people were looking at the power of the invention of Google, it was summed up in this way, and I quote, "In 1440, Johannes Gutenberg introduced Europe to the mechanical printing press, printing Bibles for the mass consumption. That technology allowed for books and manuscripts originally replicated by hand to be printed at a much faster rate, thus spreading knowledge and helping to usher in the European Renaissance. Not since Gutenberg has any invention empowered individuals and transformed success to information as profoundly as Google and changed the world as much as Google is changing the world." So seriously, a success story par excellence. And that is the story of Jan Koum. He's a Ukrainian-born American internet entrepreneur who founded what we all use and call WhatsApp with another fellow, Brian Acton. Anyway, he was born in February 24th, 1976 in Kiev, a part of the Soviet Union. And he was the only child of his parents, and they lived a very, very, very simple life. Of course, that was interrupted by all the anti-Semitism that went on there. And so the family decided to escape and come to America. They were very, very poor. It ended up that he came with his mother and his grandmother in 1992. His father had planned to join the family, but he fell ill, and he never left the Ukraine, and he died there in 1997. Jan Koum was 16 at the time of his immigration. He faced considerable challenges in adjusting to the new country. His mother took up babysitting to earn money, and he himself began working as a sweeper in a grocery store. He became interested in programming while in high school and discovered that he possessed an inherent knack for it. By the time he completed high school at 18, he was already a skilled, self-taught computer network engineer. He enrolled at San Jose State College, and while a student there, he took a job with Ernst & Young as a security tester to help him pay for his university studies. On his job, he was assigned to a new research engine called Yahoo to inspect security levels at the company's advertising system. There he met another fellow named Brian Acton, one of Yahoo's earliest employees, and the two men immediately struck up a friendship. After a few months, Koum joined Yahoo as an infrastructure engineer while still attending San Jose State University. Shortly after he started to work for Yahoo, just a few days, it suffered a system breakdown. And Jan Koum, who was attending a class at San Jose State University at the time, immediately was called to come and help solve the problem. At this juncture, he realized that he would either have to choose university or go to work with Yahoo. He left the university and he chose Yahoo. They worked together for 9 years. And during this time, they became very, very good friends. And they got very interested in the growing social media field. However, Yahoo didn't offer anything for them to explore social media. So they quit their jobs in 2007 and decided to take a year-long trip to South America. On their return to the United States, there were 2 companies for them to apply to, Facebook or Twitter. They both applied to both, and they both were rejected. Now, 2009, Coombe went and bought a new iPhone. And on visiting the first app store to open, he realized the potential offered by the market for iPhone-compatible applications. That gave him an idea for an application for low-cost, convenient communication. Excited with the idea, he roped in his friend Brian Acton, and the 2 men incorporated their new company. They called it WhatsApp on Coombe's birthday, February 24, 2009. He was 33 years old. The main principle of this new company that was being formed was that they would never, ever accept any form of advertising revenue. The duo launched WhatsApp Messenger in early 2010. The Messenger kept crashing, and the men faced many challenges in promoting this new application. Frustrated after a few months of trying, Coombe was on the verge of giving up when Acton convinced him one more time, just one more time. Anyway, there were not many other instant messengers at the time, and gradually WhatsApp became the most popular one with the users. Its popularity enabled the 2 of them, Coombe and Acton, to get additional venture capital money. The user base of WhatsApp grew steadily over the months, and by February 2013, it had about 200 million active daily users. It kept growing and growing, and in 2014, Facebook bought WhatsApp for a whopping total of $19 billion, making them some of the wealthiest men in the world. By 2016, WhatsApp became the most popular messaging application, and on an average day, more than 1 billion people use this application. So Jan Coombe is now one of the wealthiest men in America, and no story better epitomizes the contribution that immigrants have made to America and to the world at large than the story of Jan Coombe from the Ukraine and his creation of WhatsApp. So thank you all for watching. It's been my pleasure to teach you a little bit or a few tidbits about immigrants who have bettered the world. I've enjoyed my first Zoom, although there's been a couple of glitches, but I'd really prefer to be with you together, and maybe that will happen sometime soon. Thank you, Gail and Gayla. Stay well, and let's hope a new normal occurs very soon. Thanks.